Hi, Ari. How you doing?
Hi, Stephanie. I'm well. I'm currently in two Zoom meetings. Um,
Concentrate on that then.
can you hear me okay? Or does
Yes.
okay, because I was in my office hours earlier and everything was so laggy. So I was like, oh my God, I don't know if I can use my computer today, but
Oh no.
okay, good.
Yeah, no. People, I've been on that Pathways to Equity thing all day today, and people were dropping out and things like that. There's just be something going on today.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good. I'm grateful.
Um, are you going to do an introduction, or should I just start? Is there somebody who's going to do an introduction, or like contextualize it, or anything like that, or do you just want me to go?
I do not know if anyone from the dean's office or from the flex committee was planning on introducing you, but I
Okay.
certainly can. Happy to do that.
I mean, like an
And
introduction type thing, but I didn't know if there's like context or anything people you wanted to put up with before
I can I
discussion.
can do it, and especially because we have some housekeeping to make sure people get flex credit as well.
Yes.
So I can include that kind of announcement and then do a little welcome. I'm happy to do
Perfect.
that.
Okay. And then as soon as you're done with that, I'll share my screen and we'll be ready to go.
Okay, great.
Excellent.
The flex meeting that I'm in, or the workshop, is on our new data dashboards.
Oh, fun.
They're still being kind of beta tested and developed, but this is the first time I've gotten to see them, and they're really beautiful and seem to be easy to use. So I'm really excited for it to be fully launched.
Awesome. And they just aggregate by ethnicity.
Yep. Hmm.
Awesome.
Yep. And all the way down to the course level for like demographic and success data. And they are already, well, to kind of blend it into the guided pathways conversation, like to be able to use it to track students on momentum points, they're going to be able
Yeah.
to track that too, which
That's
is
amazing.
super exciting,
Yay.
considering that we did not have an easy way to pull data, um, especially with like these visuals and graphs and stuff that the system kind of populates to just help visualize it.
Yeah.
um it was all just like running reports and getting like Excel spreadsheets full of numbers and that kind of
Yeah.
thing. So
Yeah. You
this, I
need some
think,
sort
is
of
going
data
to be
visualization.
right. I just think that this is going to make data a lot less intimidating for faculty to use,
Oh,
and
good.
so
Yeah. Because in one of the
this is so
examples I
awesome.
do Pasadena City College, and I talk a little bit about their guided pathways dashboard. Um, and then their connections to race conscious view of data. So we can link that in there
Mhm.
with your new dashboards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
um I think I wish well, we may not be there yet, but like I think it was maybe Long Beach, where they were talking about their starfish integration
Yes.
and kind of take using well, they can track real time kind of student momentum points
Yeah.
and disaggregated by ethnicity.
Yes.
And so that way they're like in terms of their early alert system, like they're able to see like, okay, how are our Latino males doing here
Yes.
during week 2 of the semester. Like that's super granular data. I don't think we're
Yeah.
at that point yet, or I don't know if this system is going to be able to do that, but I just think that that is so amazing, because then you could start, and like they have success teams that are broken down demographically as well, or they have like some that are connected with special programs that that focus on specific student demos, and then they can kind of do really targeted outreach and with that intrusive support.
Yeah.
I just think that's so
Yeah.
cool.
That's what we're doing with our starfish is we're connecting our success teams into the starfish system. And then we're
Mhm.
creating identified momentum points per pathway. So if you're like in the STEM pathway, if you haven't taken math in the first semester,
Mhm.
there's going to be an interception saying you haven't taken math, but you're in a STEM pathway. We need to have a conversation with you. And then we're going to have some generalized momentum milestones through all the pathways, but then have some specific ones.
I think
through
that's
that thing.
fantastic.
Yeah, I kind of worked that through, so it's going to be exciting. Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about Starfish when I talk about Northwestern Technical College, because they usually use their Starfish intake survey as the original way to get students into the system.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, okay.
All right, I'm going to mute myself until we're ready to start.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for attending this session. We're going to wait a couple minutes before we begin. I know that there are some presentations that are ending right at 2 p.m., so to allow those participants to join us. In the meantime, you might have been hearing during other presentations that we'll be taking attendance for Flex Credit using the chat. So please type your name into the chat. That way we'll be able to have the chat transcript as documentation for Flex. I'll make another announcement before we get started. Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to wait just a few more moments before we get started, just to allow those attending the sessions that ended right at 2 to be able to join us. In the meantime, if you haven't already, please participate in the chat by posting your name. That way we'll have a record of who attended today, which we can use for Flex Credit. Okay, I think we're about ready to get started. So welcome everyone. It's so wonderful to see so many of you here in the session today. Almost 40 of us, which is really wonderful to see. For those that don't know me, my name is Ari Metz. I teach English at the Woodland campus, and I'm also one of our Guided Pathways leads. Today, we have with us Stephanie Curry from Reedley College. For those of you who attended our convocation, you would have been there to hear Stephanie talk about Guided Pathways and the onboarding process. Today, Stephanie is going to be talking about the intersections between Guided Pathways and our equity work. This is going to be that's ideal for both newcomers to Guided Pathways, as well as those of you who have been involved in the project for multiple years. Hopefully for the latter group, it will serve as increased motivation for the importance of the work of Guided Pathways. Before I let Stephanie take over, I just want to remind everyone that in order to receive Flex Credit, you will need to put your name into the chat. That way we have evidence of your attendance. And I'm going to go ahead and pass the baton on to Stephanie. So welcome, Stephanie. Happy to have you here.
Thank you, Ari. Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be back with my Woodland people. Thank you for inviting me to come and talk to you guys today about Guided Pathways and equity, something I'm truly passionate about. So I'm going to share my screen so you guys can see the PowerPoint. and we'll get started. So I'm going to try to be able to see the chat and you guys at the same time as the PowerPoint, which should be rather tricky, but I'm going to try to do that. So if you have questions during the presentation and you'd like to add them into the chat, I'm going to try to monitor those as well so that we can get questions answered during the presentation. And then I hopefully will have some time at the end to answer questions after the presentation. So feel free to do that. All right, so today we're going to be talking about equity and guided pathways. And so I just put a couple outcomes because, you know, we're instructors, we do outcomes. It's kind of our life, is that we're going to talk today about the connections between guided pathways and equity. And again, for some of you, this may be a refresher. We're going to look at the pillars. We're going to look at how equity aligns with the pillars. And some of you may have already been having these conversations, but again, it's always great to have a refresher and kind of an invigorator when we're talking about equity, because it's a nonstop conversation. We're going to look at specific equity questions related to each one of the guiding pathways pillars and kind of give you some ideas of some of the questions you can start asking about your systems and your presentation in your own work with regards to equity. And then we're going to look at several different community colleges under each one of the pathways and kind of things that they're doing specifically to address equity. So there'll be kind of some overview, some specifics on the pillars, and then some examples from other colleges as we go through. But again, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll see if we can get them answered. All right, thank you for Ari for helping monitor the chat. So I just want to go quickly, in case some of you are unfamiliar with the Guided Pathways framework, because I know we have people coming in and out of our system all the time, and we want to make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page when it comes to Guided Pathways. And if you guys have seen me present before, you know that I cannot like stop moving my hands. So if you see my hands moving forward in the screen, I can't talk without moving my hands. So the Guided Pathways model entails a systemic redesign of the student experience. And I just want to kind of highlight that portion right there. It's the idea is we're changing the systems to enhance the student experience. And so those are two things that you really want to keep in mind when it comes to equity, is the idea of systems and the students. And that's what we're really focused on in Guided Pathways, is changing systems so that students can start from entry point of pre-application all the way through graduation and transfer are supported all the way through the process, and that our systems are designed for them and not for us. So we're going to talk about that in the context of equity. So when we look at systemic structures, what kind of things are we talking about? And so if we look here, these are just some of the things I put off the top of my head about what are these systemic concerns that we need to look at across our colleges. So things like disconnected courses, unclear program requirements or multiple requirements, confusing application processes. If you've ever had to go through CCSC Apply, it's not fun. It's a lot of information. Financial aid barriers, isolation from support right now, especially during the COVID period. Sometimes we get unclear advising, not by intent of the counselor, but sometimes they go to multiple counselors, they may get different experiences. And so we want to make sure there's lots of options available for students. We want to make sure we clarify those options for students. We often do some onboarding for students, but it's usually minimal. And there's basic needs support, website navigation, all these different things, technology and structures. And especially during this time period with COVID, we've found that our systems are made for students who are on campus. They're not necessarily made for our students who are off campus or can't access things when they're not on campus. So we say a student can come to the library and get access to a computer. What if the library is closed? And so what we're really now realizing is our system is designed for our students on our campus. So how can we look at these things through an equity lens and through our experience lenses and see how we can change these systems so that they're more student focused and student centered. All right. So just a little overview of the 4 pillars. I know you guys have talked about these before, but they're always good things to have a reminder on. We have these 4 pillars that kind of are the student's guide through our college. But we do have to remember that the student comes in earlier than the Clarify the Path. And after they leave the Ensure Learning, they're still in the path of learning. And so we need to support the students all the way through their pathways. So Clarify the Path is often discussed about, making sure that pathways are clear, systems are clear, things are easy to navigate. Entering the path is our onboarding and helping students start successfully and end successfully. The stay on the path is kind of that central part where they're on our campus, and how can we support them so they can complete their college goals, whether it's a certificate or a degree or anything else that they would like to do on campus, or even just take a music class. We're going to support them in that. And then ensure learning is to make sure that they're actually learning the skills that they're going to need in their careers and their transfer programs. And so there's this kind of continuum of the student experience all the way through here. These are all built on systems. So if we go into the Clarify the Path, our curriculum system is in that one. And Entering the Path, our A&R systems are in that one. The Stay on the Path, we could do early alerts and counseling and all those things. Those are all built on systems that we have designed and kept on going for decades, because that's the way we move students through. So we're talking about when it comes to equity, and I put some definitions up here just kind of so we can kind of all feel like we're in the same zone for definitions. And I want to highlight the equity one because I think that's really important for us to have this discussion, is that equity is the condition under which individuals, and this is every individual student, is provided the resources they specifically need to have access to the same opportunities as the general population. And I think that's really something we need to center ourselves in. Equity accounts for systemic inequalities, meaning the distribution of resources provide more to those who need it most. And so again, that's the difference between that equality and equity discussion, is that equity focuses on the individual student, what they specifically need, and how can we support them so that they have the same level playing field as everybody else, and they have the same opportunities as everybody else. And so if you go through, these are some of the questions, these are some of the definitions that come out of the Chancellor's Office, Vision for Success, the Diversity and Equity and Inclusion Task Force, and the call to action from the State Chancellor's Office. Okay. So why is equity at the heart of Guided Pathways? And if you look back at the presentation here where it says the 4 pillars of Guided Pathways, I often call equity the foundation. And so it's kind of this piece right here. It's the foundation of the Guided Pathways pillars, because you can't build the pillars unless you have that foundation of equity. Otherwise, you're building crooked pillars, right? You need to make sure that you're developing a strong foundation in equity so that your pillars stand strong and you can support the students. So this quote comes from Kay McClenny, who's known nationwide for her work with the CESI out of Texas. And she says, at the heart of Guided Pathways reform is a passionate commitment to achieving equity in college access and outcome for students. And so at the bottom of the quote, she says, ideally, every design decision is made with equity in mind. And that's what I kind of want to bring out forward today, is that anytime we talk about Guided Pathways, the word equity should be in the conversation. And every time we make a decision about Guided Pathways, or we suggest something about Guided Pathways, the question of equity should be in our minds. And it should be, we want to do this, how is that contributing to the equity for students? Or we don't want to do this, and we're like, how is it being inequitable with students? And so that always should be at the foundation of any discussion that you have about equity and how you can support those 4 pillars. And I think this quote is also very strong, is unless reforms identify explicitly how they will address racial disparities in student outcomes and undo structural racism that contributes to these disparities, it is unlikely that equity gaps will close. And so we can do Guided Pathways and we can say we're going to make all these changes and we can do these types of things, but if we're building on the structures that are already not working for students, what does that mean for our students? It means we're only perpetuating the same systems that that showed our disproportionately impacted students' needs anyways, or right before. Like we can't build on a shaky ground. Like we need to build that foundation of equity so that our systems that we build are built in line with equity and with the student in mind. And so I'm encouraging us all to sit there and talk about being equity-minded practitioners and bring these into our discussions about Guided Pathways. And so those equity-minded practitioners are those who recognize the harm of institutional racism and thus question assess and act to resolve practices and policies and norms that create inequities for racial minoritized groups. And if you look at this is not just we're going to talk about it, this is we're going to do something about it. It's the action that's required when it comes to equity-minded practitioners. So we can be equity-minded, but we also want to be equity-minded practitioners, and we want to move the discussion forward. And we want to question, assess, and act to resolve as we go through here. All right. And right before we end with, I stop for questions because I want to give you guys a break and take a sip of water, is I want to make sure we're talking about a mindset for change. And so I don't know how much you guys have had discussion about this, but the idea of the growth or asset mindset. And so as we're having this conversation today, I kind of want to bring us into this mindset of making our colleges student ready. When I started in the community college system 20 years ago, which is hard to believe, but true, it was always about making students college ready. And so we would say, well, they're not college ready when they get to us. They're not college ready. So they're already at a deficit point. Like we're going to put them through, 3 semesters of remedial English because they're not college ready. That's a deficit-minded perspective. And when we talk about changing systems, we want to make sure that we're not trying to design a system and making the student fit into it, right? We're not trying to make the students who are the square pegs fit into the round holes. Again, because it doesn't individualize the student, which is what equity asks us to do, but it also is a deficit mindset. Like it's their problems that they have to fix before they come to us. Whereas in the equity framework, what we're talking about is we want the college to become student ready. That we want to look at our systems and make sure that we're making it as streamlined and as easy as possible for our students to navigate through. So as we go through this, this is the work of Carol Dweck with regards to growth and asset mindset. My college has been doing a lot of discussion about this. And even when we're looking at our emails, when we send them out to students, a lot of the emails are like, you need to do this, 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 and this. And it's very negative language, right? It's like, it's your fault, you're doing something wrong. How can we actually change that language to an asset or growth mindset language so that we're showing that we're ready for the student and not that the student has to be ready for us? So I kind of want to bring that kind of discussion in here, let you guys think about that as we look through some of these questions. How can we answer the questions that we're going to look at in a growth mindset as opposed to a deficit mindset? All right. All right, so that was a lot of talking for a few minutes. So I wanted to give a chance to see if anybody had any questions regarding those type of areas, deficit mindset, equity mindedness, the pillars, any questions you might have from that.
Hey, Stephanie.
Yeah.
This is Jose. I appreciate the previous slide regarding deficit versus growth mindset. And I think as institutions, we've often been in this deficit mindset system, unfortunately. And rather than focusing where the student is and where the student needs to go, which is more of a growth mindset. And I would add to that growth and strength mindset versus a deficit. And I know that at least from a counseling perspective, that's what we try to focus when we onboard students. But systemically, that's been a constant issue. So it's great to see this, that we're moving towards more inclusive, more growth mindset. So I appreciate that information. It's really helpful.
Yeah. And I'll have to say that we've done this kind of exercise where we write something up, like we're so proud of it, we're writing something up, and then all of a sudden we're like, oh no, we got to sit there and we actually have to look at it because some of the language is still deficit language because that seems to be our automatic to go to in kind of our systems. And so we actually have to sit there and we have to like, okay, we're going to now rewrite this in growth mindset. And so even our Guided Pathways group wrote up our vision for Guided Pathways and it still had deficit language in it. And so we had to rewrite it in this growth mindset.
And it often leads to blaming the student versus looking at the system and how it's functioning and not functioning.
Yeah, so it's a really good activity if you guys are working through this and you kind of want to develop this kind of growth mindset, is to take things that you've already written and reread them through a growth mindset and see how you might be able to change the language to be more asset minded and growth minded. Because I think you'll find that you can see deficit minded language in there as you're going through.
And it relates even right at the beginning in student services too, looking at our policies and our approaches, and really our how we interact with students and how to facilitate them going through the whole system.
Any other questions or comments? All right, we'll get moving on to the questions, and then we can always stop for more comments afterwards. All right, so what we're gonna do next is we're gonna go through each one of the 4 pillars, and I'm gonna send forth to you some specific equity-minded questions under each one of those pillars. We're only gonna look at a couple of them each one. It's pretty wordy on the pages, but I wanted you to have them for later, even if we don't go through all of them today, okay? So if we have pillar 1, which is that clarifying the path, these are some of the questions that you can think about as you're doing equity work. What does the college know about the backgrounds, experiences, and aspirations of diverse student groups? What do we know about our community? And so if they're like my school, the majority of faculty members do not live in my community, in the community in which we teach. We live outside that community. And so how are we supposed to help our students if we don't know who our students are? So understanding those demographics. And in fact, I was taking an equity course this summer, and they said that we should be ethnographers of our areas, of our college and our communities, because we really need to understand where our students are coming from in order to be able to create structures to support them. What do you know, how do your program maps work for diverse students? So I know you guys are working in your program maps. We're doing the same thing. We have our first version. Now we're taking them out to the students and saying, do these work for you? Does this make sense to you? How does this work for you? So those are things you really need to do. How does the student know about how do you know that the process that students use to enroll, transfer, and complete pathways, and how do you know if there's an equitable data in there? And so now you guys just had a presentation on your new dashboards, which is really exciting. So now you're gonna have that data to answer some of these questions. And it just takes the time to sit down and actually have those questions and disaggregate the data and have somebody walk with you through that data to say, okay, we're gonna look at the transfer trends of our disproportionately impacted groups. Where are they, where's the problem? Where is the bottleneck? Why are they not transferring? Let's talk to them. And so these questions are about clarifying the path, but they dig deeper into why we need to do that for each student. All right. The other ones are how do you reframe and recognize the assets that our students bring to their college experience? And how do you support them and the benefits they may be experiencing by better understanding of pathways? So how can our pathways work, help our students better? And making sure that we're bringing the voices of our minoritized students into the process. So bringing students into there. So I just wanted to give a couple examples of some colleges that are working kind of around this framework of guided pathways and pillar 1. So the first is Pasadena City College. And similar to them, they have their guided pathways dashboard. And so there's links throughout this PowerPoint that I will send to Ari and everybody so that you guys have them and you can click on here and get more information about each one of these colleges. And so they've done this guided pathways dashboard where they've put their specific data that they've identified as guided pathways related. You could disaggregate it by ethnicity group or socioeconomic or all those different other groups. And then what they're doing is they're doing a whole professional development series on race conscious review of data and how that impacts what their decision making is. And so it brings in that whole idea of there's data out there, but you have to be able to use it and being able to use it effectively and understand how it can be used. And so they've taken it on not only to do the dashboard and make sure that data is publicly available, but that people understand how to use it and how to use it effectively to make sure that students are being supported. So they've again created this whole professional development program to support students. I will also say, I didn't put it in here, but I will say that many colleges are also hiring students as student workers, especially during this time of COVID, when they need jobs, to be part of their guided pathways process. And so they hire them to be part of their committees. And so their job is to be a guided pathways navigator, liaison, whatever it is, so they can provide the input that we all need on our committees. And so we kind of they pay them to go to the committee meetings. They pay them to work in guided pathways. And so it's a student job to be a guided pathways person. Yes, PCC does an amazing job, and they are nominated for the Aspen multiple times. The other one I want to highlight in Pillar 1 is Northeast Wisconsin Technical College. This is the only non-California college I put in here. But for years, at the Hobson and Starfish presentations, they've been a superstar. And what they have often presented about is what they call their student intake survey. And what they do is they actually have students, before they even enter the college, they do an intake survey, and they ask them, do you have transportation to and fro? Do you have stable housing? Do you have, are you able to get food? Are you worried about textbook costs? Do you have access to a computer and internet? And so they ask them all these different type of framing questions, and then they send out to that student through the Starfish program, but you can do it through the programs, actual assistance for each one of those things. They're like, you don't have transportation? Okay, let's get you a transportation voucher. You need help on basic skills? Here's the date and hours of our food pantry, and can we get you, a card to the supermarket to get you some food? They have a targeted intervention for every single one of the things that they have on their intake survey. And so even when students are coming in, they're supporting them as they go through that. And so again, this is a link to a presentation that they did specifically showing how they're kind of using this information to support students even before they walk through the door. And making sure that students have those targeted interventions that they need to do that. All right. Any questions about Pillar 1?
Stephanie, hi, this is Adela. As we're going to be engaging in the work of onboarding students, that we have the Guided Pathways team onboarding, which is going to be specifically focused on the onboarding of students. Do you have any specific recommendations for us that we should be looking at, or you must implement this particular thing?
I think it depends. I know this is the Guided Pathways thing, but it depends on the college. I think you guys have to decide what do you think students need to know and be supported in them when they first enter. And so my college developed a whole list of design principles specifically for entering students. This is what they need to know, and this is where we need to make sure they have access to those areas. Okay. And so I recommend you guys have that discussion, and you bring in your counselors and your students and your admin and your tech people and your A&R people and everybody into the same conversation about what do students need to know before they get here, and then how can we support them over the next 2-3 years while they're here to make sure that they have that support. Because again, it's that inoculation idea. We don't want to give everything to them in one thing. But we want to find a way to identify what they need, and then find structures and milestones all the way through their experience to support them to make sure that they move through the system. Does that make sense?
Yes. Do you recommend Starfish? It seems to me like they use milestones. And
yeah, we use Starfish, and we do it because we can do this as a case management model, which is what the Wisconsin model is, that they start out with that intake survey, and then they do interventions based on their case management model. So they're assigned to a specific person who will run those interventions for them. There are other systems that do this, but yeah, Starfish is a data management tool. It's got an embedded, it's like an online SEP. It's got an early alert function. It's got a predictive analytics function, and has a communication texting email system. And so we're using it to set up these milestones all the way through the student experience to make sure that they're being supported all the way through. But there's lots of systems out there that do it. We just did Starfish because we were one of the pilots for the Chancellor's Office.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right. So we'll go on to Pillar 2, and we can always go back to these pillars later on if you have questions that come up afterwards. So this is the choosing the path. And so I know you guys are doing a lot of work right now in the mapping. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so this is like, sorry, I got confused there because some of the questions are very similar, but again, the questions bleed all the way through the 4 pillars, right? You can't do the pillars independently because again, you can't hold up the house with just one pillar. You got to have all 4 of them support students. So how do your pathways reflect the aspirational goals and desired outcomes of diverse student groups? How do you know that if you don't ask them? How do you know that if you don't bring the students into that conversation to have them look at that information? This is an important one. How are diverse students as well as diverse faculty and staff empowered to support pathways choices made by diverse students? How do you bring those faculty members in, those staff members in to help to empower students moving forward? And then what changes are going to be made to improve the success for racially minoritized students in navigating transfer pathways? Because I think we all know in our data that we do not have enough students, especially minoritized students, going to a 4-year institution. So if we're going to look at our process, how are we going to make sure that that process is streamlined, students are able to do it, and we provide them the support that they need to transfer? And so these are kind of questions you can kind of bring forward in your discussion of choosing the path. And in line with the maps you're already doing and the work you're already doing, how can you bring these questions in to make sure that the maps that you're doing and the pathways that you're doing are the most effective for students? And again, as I said at the opening day, whatever we do right now is it's a first pancake. We know it's going to be changing. We know we're going to be moving forward on these types of things. So take what you're already doing and then look at them through this kind of this equity mindset and this growth mindset and see how you can make things better and make that second pancake even more beautiful than the first. All right. So a couple of examples of some specific things from Pillar 2 is many of you have probably already seen the Bakersfield Program Mapper. And actually, if you've seen them do it recently, they actually have maps going all the way from high school and dual enrollment programs, all the way through the 2-year Bakersfield College, and then all the way to the end of their degree. So you can actually see the pathway from high school all the way to your 4-year degree. The Bakersfield College Mapper is a really, it's a fun tool because students can then move classes around and see how long it's going to take them to complete the degree. What if I take this course, or what if I don't take this course? And so it helps them make informed decisions in doing that. And I know as they were developing their program mapper, they brought in students from all different areas and minoritized students specifically to look at the process and see how is this working for you? What is going to be happening? What does this make sense to you? And how can we make sure that you're getting the information that you need? So you can see examples of the program mapper here. The other one I wanted to highlight here is Modesto Junior College. And this is what they talked about at a webinar a couple weeks ago, specifically about the COVID crisis. And so Modesto Junior College a couple years ago started a case management model. They've been very successful with it. And they hired success specialists for their pathways. And these are classified members who facilitate a lot of the progress of a student through a path. They do not do counseling. They do not do SEPs or anything like that. What they do is they kind of find the momentum points and track the students through those momentum points. And when they go off track, they contact them and make sure that they're okay, or they need help, or how can I help you get back on track? Like, I noticed you didn't register this semester. How can I help you register? And so when we all, most of us experienced a downturn in the number of students coming back this year, because many students didn't know what was going on. They didn't know if it was going to be online. They didn't know if it was going to be on campus. They didn't know what was going to go on. They actually had the students, the success specialists at Modesto, call thousands of students who had not registered and ask them why. And how can we help you come back to the college? Like you've got 2 semesters in, you're well on your way. What can I do to help you come back? And so they actually facilitated them getting registered. They helped them get vouchers for things, for books, They made sure that they could look at their schedules and help them get online classes. They helped them connect to support services during that time period. Like you're gonna need help in math, great, we'll set you up with a math tutor. And they facilitated that all for students. And so they got hundreds more students to apply for fall registration or to register for fall than they had before, because they were able to reach out and do that. And so it's a very strong case management model in helping the students stay on the path. Actually, that's the next pillar, but it all aligns. Again, all this work kind of crosses these different areas. So I just wanted to highlight those two specific examples. But again, there's hundreds of examples across our colleges of faculty members, staff, students, all working together to support this equity-driven discussion. Any questions on that? No? Okay, let me just take a sip and we'll get going. All right, so pillar 3 is the staying on the path pillar. And again, this is the kind of the long pillar for us. Like we have the kind of like, there's 2 years when they're on with us, or 2 or 3 years when they're with us. How can we support them? So one of the questions is to what extent do the faculty and staff who are involved with students reflect the demographics, backgrounds, and experiences of our diverse students? And I think that's really an important one to kind of think about when we're doing faculty prioritization, we're doing hiring, all those different things, is to making sure that our students feel comfortable in a college and see representations of themselves within our staff, faculty, and administrators. How does the advising, and this comes from outside of California, so the word advising should be changed to counseling as you're doing this. Yeah. How does the institution understand its role in improving completion according to the patterns of enrollment, right, by racially minoritized students compared to the majority group? So again, it's taking that as data points and actually sitting there and having discussion and looking at them across the pillars. How do we know that students, if we're looking at our completion numbers, how do we know how our students are doing across all of our groups? If we see a gap there, what are we doing to address that? And specifically in that, addressing that, is there a systemic barrier in our processes that is keeping a student from moving forward and continuing on? And that's kind of that discussion. Like we can't fix the student, we can fix our systems. And so that's really kind of an important discussion. How can we fix our systems so that we can make sure that all of our students are supported? And then what practices and activities are being used to support the Guided Pathways reforms and improve outcomes? So what kind of things are we doing to support students and bringing students in? Yeah, yes, but as I already said, bring ideas. If you have ideas about kind of what to do with these pillars and these questions, feel free to put them in the chat and bring them up so that you can actually have a record of them as you go through. But these questions are mostly there to kind of like generate conversations and kind of center your conversations in these equity frameworks and when you're looking at systems. So a couple of examples. So I just want to bring forward this example of when we're talking about faculty and staff and hiring and making sure that we're doing the best we can to get diverse faculty and staff and supporting diverse faculty and staff once they come to us. The ASCCC has to have created a faculty diversification modules. It's a Canvas course. You can actually walk through, which actually from hiring all the way through to supporting faculty members from diverse backgrounds. It gives you tools and tips and support and suggested questions and all kinds of different resources you might need to actually look at your hiring processes to make sure that you're equitizing your hiring processes. And so it's built like a Canvas course. You can walk through it. It goes from, again, announcements and sample announcements and language you could potentially put in announcements, all the way through the rubrics for looking at applications to potential questions, and then how to support faculty once you hire them. Because sometimes the attrition rate of our racially minoritized faculty members is higher. And so we want to make sure not only that we can hire people, we can support them. And so that's another great tool for you guys to bring in to have your conversations about your systems for hiring. The other one is the Compton College. I just want to bring this in because it brings in, they have their charter as their mascot, completion by design, pathways and support. And so they actually have this built into their master plan, their educational master plan. And so they've integrated their whole idea of guided pathways and completion by design and supporting students into their master plan, and then created outcomes in that master plan to support it. And that's aligned with their facilities master plan, their hiring master plan, their technology master plan, and all those different other areas. And so they're really got the infrastructure all the way through to support the needs that they have identified. And then of course their equity and their master plan links into the resource allocation. So again, it's taking those big systems and making sure the systems are equitized so that we can support students. All right. Questions or comments about Pillar 3? Okay. So then we'll talk about Pillar 4. Pillar 4 is this ensure learning. And this one brings in culture responsive teaching and learning. How can those be deployed to meet the learning needs of our students? How is culture responsive impacting students? How is pedagogy addressing and making discussions about structural inequalities? And then how are faculty and staff supported in creating these culturally relevant courses as we go through there? And this is another one. How are practitioners being trained to effectively lead and deal with equity inside and outside of the classroom? And so that's really one of those big professional development questions about how can we support everybody to be able to have the framework and the understanding to support equity on our campuses. So making sure everybody understands what the definition of equity is and how we can support students. Looking at the different systems and how we can, like Pasadena City College did, they're training their faculty to look at the data and use the data effectively. So again, how can we empower equity leaders on our campus and then give them the opportunity to make some significant change through the Guided Pathways framework? All right, so a couple of examples for Pillar 4. And one of them is Long Beach City College. And if you can ever see a presentation by them, they've done an amazing job what they call curriculum equity audits. And although on my campus, when I said audits, people like, what, audits. What it actually is an equity, it's an equity review of the curriculum. And so what they've done is they've done it over a couple different groupings. And what they do is they get faculty members from specific disciplines, and they get them all sitting in a room together, and they bring out their curriculum and they look at it and they ask hard questions like, who's being represented in this curriculum? Who's not being represented in this curriculum? Who are the writers that we're reading or the people that we're focusing on in these curricular areas? And is it a broad representation, and does it reflect the students that we have in our own community? And so they actually look at their curriculum, the curriculum outlines of records as a group, discussing how they can equitize their curriculum or decolonize the curriculum. And these have been very powerful. And they started with, they've talked to math, and they've talked to sociology, and they've talked to, some of the groups that you wouldn't think would be as relevant as others. But what they found was that every discipline needs an equity conversation. And so they've really facilitated these questions. It's been very faculty driven. Faculty have been in the room together, working with each other. They bring in their part-time people, their full-time people, and they actually sit down and have a conversation about this. Sometimes they bring counselors in or some other people in for context. It's whatever we want to do with that, but it's a program that they're doing, and they're working through their curriculum to see how they can create more culturally relevant curriculum and meet the needs and the desires of their students. Because I think if we talk to our students, and we've talked to our students on our campus, and they say, we don't see ourselves in the curriculum. we don't see ourselves in this curriculum. What body at Long Beach facilitates the audits? It's the curriculum committee. And they created a process through the curriculum committee to do this. And so they're facilitating it, and they actually been doing it over breaks. So they do it over summer or winter breaks. And they actually do give a stipend, but again, you could decide that on your guys' own. But it was really a faculty driven process to do that. And so I linked to the webinar that they discussed this at the chancellor's office. But I know if you contacted Long Beach, they could probably give you more details on this. But it was really kind of an exciting idea of actually implementing this idea and bringing faculty together to have the conversations about do our students see themselves in our curriculum? And how can we further those conversations across our college? And really make it discipline focused so that we can actually get that those information into the CORs. The other one that I wanted to highlight is from Fresno City College, which is one of my sister colleges. And they are actually taking equity training and designing their entire onboarding process for their faculty and actually their staff and administrators, and creating a whole equity-driven training program, professional development program for new faculty members. And so even from the first day they get on campus, they're brought into a group of people who are going to be discussing this all the way through the semester. And so they're really focusing their onboarding of their faculty and also their staff and administrators, because they brought all of them in together to focus on, we are an equity college, we're an equity-driven college, and you're going to be a part of our college. We're going to make sure that you understand the basics of equity and how it influences our decision making. And so they're just starting it, so it's kind of a brand new thing. But I think it's really exciting to do that focusing of professional development support for faculty, but also in equity, highlighting it. And that way all the new faculty are getting trained together, and they're working together to identify inequitable practices as we go forward. All right. Questions about Pillar 4? Don't be scared by the word audit, as my faculty was, but it's just an intentional look at your curriculum and looking at it through our communities, and do we support our communities in there? Yeah. Annette, you had a question?
I have a question. Were you saying that faculty from multiple colleges got together to look at their cores?
No, all the faculty from the same discipline got together.
Got it. Okay, I thought I might have misheard that.
Sorry.
And then and you can answer this later, maybe, or even offline. But as I'm watching you go through these really great ideas, I'm wondering, are there any coalitions or cooperatives of smaller colleges that have gotten together to share resources? Because it occurs to me that, you know, in a business department with 15 full-time faculty, you can do a lot more than you can, you know, maybe with 3 full-time faculty. So I'm just wondering, have there been any discussions about economies of scale in doing this important work?
Yeah, that's actually a really good idea. Especially in my college, we have so many people who are one people disciplines or one people departments. And so we have that same problem. I haven't heard of anything, but it doesn't mean that we can't. And I know that like librarians, we all have a group together, and we have listservs and things like that. So I'm sure if you guys have connections across the state, or you need connections across the state, we can find people and that we can connect to who are in the same discipline.
Okay.
And in fact, I'm sure the faculty members from Long Beach are super proud of what they're doing. And so I'm sure they'd be happy to help, you know, give you information about what they're doing with regards to the curriculum changes.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, assessment might be a better word than audit. Yeah. I know my faculty freaked out about that. I'm like, no, it's just an assessment. It's a review. It's not an audit, but yeah. All right. The criteria was developed. They actually created, oh, sorry, Ari, I missed that part of the question. They actually got together and created type of a design principles for the equity audit. They created a process. They created kind of a handbook. And then they have somebody who helps facilitate the conversations as they go through. Yeah. I think it's an exciting idea. All right. And so as we're getting to the end, I just want to say, you know, a lot of this work is hard, and it's not easy. and all of our colleges are kind of trying to work through this, especially at the same time as we're trying to make sure all of our students get laptops and computers and all these different things because of COVID. But there's lots of resources out there for us to kind of work with our colleagues across the state, which is why I gave you some examples of those. They've been putting up stuff at the Vision Resource Center. It has lots of different resources and things that people have been putting up there. But I just wanted to put forward, as part of the CA20, which is the Guided Pathways group, the group that facilitated that process is the NCII. Which for the life of me, I can't remember what the acronym is right now, but it's something rather important. And they have created some toolkits on advancing equity through guided pathways. And they've done a whole series of them. So there's 11 specific guides. And they've asked people across the nation, and a lot of them are actually from California, what are you doing with regards to equity and diversity on your campuses? And so they've got these 11 guides that you can click on, and it gives you like a brief overview of the topic. It gives you discussion questions. It gives you kind of examples of things that people have done. And each one is about 4 to 5 pages long, so they're not too long. But when we don't have the conversation, when we want to have these conversations, sometimes we need a guide to have these conversations, especially if we're not all experts in equity. And I know I'm like on my own equity journey, and I know a lot of us are on our own equity journeys this year. But their guide number 1 is interesting. It's an institutional self-assessment for equity. It's like, where are you in the equity process? And it kind of helps you facilitate how to have this conversation at your campus. There's ones on fostering faculty diversity. Number 5, which is supporting students from application to the first day of classes, that creating student connection and belonging upon entry, taking an assessed asset-based approach to student onboarding. That's a kind of growth mindset to student onboarding. Those are all things that I thought would be really aligned with the discussions that you guys are already having about onboarding. And so as you're having this discussion about onboarding, perhaps bring in some of these guides and some of the questions that we have in the pillars to kind of facilitate that conversation about, are the changes we're making going to increase equity for our students? And so we have that. They also have one on reducing student gaps in transfer math and English. That one is interesting, but again, because California has already done 705, that one is more for other states. That one's a little different for us. But there's reframing college instruction. There's culturally responsive learning environments for students, which is really exciting. And then integrating non-academic supports into the student journey. So that kind of student services support. And so I kind of wanted to leave you guys with this, these guides that you can then use for further conversation about equity on your campuses. And with a couple more seconds. So this is, again, the link here is for the advancing, this is a fantastic article that I got the questions from about equity, which is integrating racial equity into guided pathways, an amazing article. These are 2 webinars that specifically are connected to the examples that I gave you. So Long Beach and Modesto and some of those other ones were kind of highlighted in these webinars. And they're also in the Vision Resource Center. And then the ACS-CCC Guided Pathways website also has some amazing resources in there, including webinars and all those different things. Yeah, I will send the link to the presentation and make sure you guys have access to it all. So that was a lot of information in like 50 minutes. But are there questions or ideas that people had as we go through?
Just a reminder to people, put your name in the chat so that we can send you the slides afterwards.
Yeah. And feel free to share and ask questions and anything else. Any equity discussions are so important that the more we can facilitate them, the better.
I just want to take,
yeah, well, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to take the opportunity to invite anyone who has any ideas with respect to how we can maybe examine our onboarding practices or our practices or policies around supporting student success, to attend the breakout session that's immediately following this presentation from 3 to 4. that's targeted to members of our onboarding and student success design teams, but anybody who would like to be a part of the conversation and to kind of help set priorities for us is welcome to attend. And I'll put the ad code for the meeting in the chat.
So the next one, we're gonna look at more at like the practical, how we're going to be able to take the information that we're thinking about and actually make it into action. Because there's phases to equity work. There's the kind of the equity mindedness and make sure that everybody is in the same framework and looking at equity, and then taking that information and creating it into action is the harder part. It's, you know, having discussions is hard, but even making sure that you're making those changes. And I was at the Pathways to Equity conference online, of course. And Ed Bush did the keynote, and he said, nothing is sacred when you're looking at these types of things. That you actually have to look at all the things that we do that we take for granted, and make sure you have those conversations like, is this working for students or is it working for us? Because frankly, we have the time and the experience and things like that to be inconvenienced. Our students do not. And so it's really important to make sure that we're designing our colleges for our students. And looking at through the equity lens allows us to have those conversations. All right.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much, Stephanie, for your time today, and for helping to bring Guided Pathways into the equity conversation. It's always been a part of the conversation, but kind of clarifying that and making it explicit, I think, is always helpful to provide context for the work that we're doing. And again, I just want to invite anyone who wants to continue to be a part of the conversation and to think about kind of what are the next steps now, in particular in regards to onboarding and student success, to please join us for the follow-up session beginning in just a few minutes.
All right. Thank you guys all. And it's wonderful again to see you all, even if it is virtually. And again, if you have questions later on, you know, feel free to email me. I'm happy to help out in any way. And I can provide you these links if anything doesn't work the links wise, I can always send you copies of things. All right. So I'll wait around another minute and see if you guys have any questions in the chat. If not, I'll see you hopefully at the other presentation.